Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier again with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the South Coast Artist Index. We have a special guest. Every guest is special. You know that. But as per usual, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and to spell their name. And sometimes we have fun and frivolity with that portion of the program, and sometimes it's just a plain out dud. So here we go. Guest, please introduce yourself.
Right. Thank you so much for having me, Ron. My name is Katherine Knutsen. I go by Kat. My last name, Knutsen, is Knutsen. And a lot of times people butcher the pronunciation because naturally in English we silence the K. So I always tell people it's like rowing a canoe with Zen. Knutsen.
That's a good one. That's probably about as good as, and it was from somebody addressed a letter to me. It was Ron for the Arabic numeral TR. It still worked. That kind of weird thing. So, wow, a lot has gone on just in this year of pandemic. So tell us what you're excited about first. Let's get that out of the way with.
Okay. Oh my goodness, so many things. Let's see. Art related, I've got a solo exhibit at Co-Creative coming up around the corner in May. I'm excited about that. I'm still figuring out the content I'm going to put in the show because I have a lot of different content, so I'm still trying to figure out the direction I'm going to take that. There was a solo exhibit last year that was supposed to happen in April called Micro Macro that got canceled because of COVID. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go in that same direction or modify it a little bit. Let's see, what else do we have? I'm teaching. This semester is crazy busy. I've got 5 classes I'm managing right now. They're all in the digital world. So there's like electronic imaging and computer graphics, digital photography, and surface pattern design. And so that's kind of got me going in these, my work a lot of times follows what I teach. I teach and I try to create my work so that there's content for my students to show them how to apply the concepts we're talking about, or examples of how to apply them. And let's see, what else? There's so many things. Let's see, murals. There's a mural installation that's going up with the CEDC. I've been working on these panels. You could actually see one of them behind me right there. I just got to finish that guy's face.
Now, this is your second one because I would obviously like to speak about the first one, the jazz one. And and I want to go back a couple of steps. Number one, the pandemic seems to have found you busier.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And how has it changed you?
Well, the pandemic, I had to be a lot more safer, more careful. Everything went digital. My job teaching, everything went online. Luckily, I already had some experience working online. So the biggest transition was bureaucratic, like make sure you have everything checked and everything's at a certain standard. There was quite an adjustment, and then making sure students had access to the materials and access to internet, access to a computer. The school worked really hard to help students who didn't have access otherwise get it. I love the school that I work with.
Is it CCRI still?
At Bristol Community College.
Oh, it's Bristol. Okay.
Yes. And so that affected my students. It affected teaching methods. I have a little studio over here when I was teaching drawing and painting last semester. So I had a little tripod and lights and created a tiny little video studio for making the deliverables and demos for that. And so went digital. You had to learn. I already knew a lot about video editing, and I knew a lot about, the basics of like videography. So making the tutorials wasn't that bad. It was just all the deadlines for making content every week for students. So getting a new work have it in place so that I can make the content on schedule was a bit of a struggle. The studio, I have a studio at Kilburn, and that studio is going under some major renovations right now. They basically did the eminent domain thing, but it's not federal, it's the building owner. They're creating more studios, and so where my studio space is located, they're kind of turning a large portion of that into a hallway, so it's under some bit of remodeling right now as
So
it's
you're
changed.
in the older section,
Yeah,
up where Gunbolt was, Jim
yeah,
Charette and
yeah, yeah,
the Winston Gallery, Vic De Silva.
yeah. I'm right across the hallway from where
Wow,
Sherwood used to be.
they're really
Right
going
across
through that
the hallway.
system, huh?
Oh yeah. And so it's just a lot of patience and emails. I love the new cafe they opened up there.
Uh-huh.
Shout
Let's
out
give them
to
a
them.
plug.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many cafes.
Do-
Doko.
Doco,
Doko.
yeah, the
Doko
dough
Company.
company isn't that what
Yeah.
Doco stands? Yeah, okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
hope
they're
they're making dough.
oh, they seem to have been doing really well. And more power to them. Another cafe, you know how cafes. I'm of the firm belief that when you have a space like cafes, I mean, we have to be very careful with everything that's going on with COVID right now. But outside of COVID times, places like cafes create another setting for people to kind of mingle, congregate, talk about ideas. You know,
I'm a true believer in that. Having lived in Portugal for a year and became immersed in that cafe society, which is sadly lacking here.
yeah,
And I've spoken with several artists on the podcast, and I really think that post-pandemic, which is another question I want to ask about you personally, but post-pandemic, I'm hoping to see a return to that.
hopefully. I'm curious. There's been such a push for technology. Like I've seen so many things, like there's been a big growth in things like augmented reality, virtual reality. I'm seeing all sorts of things pop up about different ways to design for people to have better experiences on the screen. The whole thing with Zoom now became a norm. All of our activities have kind of shifted again. And I just think that is so fascinating, and despite, having to be separated from one another, but we still, everybody longs for that connection and that sense of like social activity to keep us sane. And so I
Yeah.
just really admire how we kind of collectively figured out ways to maintain as best as we can those conversations and relationships with one another. So,
I prefer the Zoom to a phone call. I've never liked phone calls, really. I'm not like, I can talk. God knows I can in a cafe in conversation, but on a phone, it's like, for me, it's very awkward. I guess I need the visual cues, and that kind of interaction. It's just much more comfortable, you know.
okay, yeah.
Um, Knowing what you know now so far, what do you think your post-pandemic world is going to be like?
So post-pandemic, when is that going to happen? I wonder.
There's so much conjecture out there.
I,
The rule of thumb said Christmas of next year, or the next upcoming Christmas. Now there are people running around saying, "Oh, we have the vaccine. We don't have to wear masks, and we can do whatever." No. And
yeah,
now the UK variant is now raising his ugly head, and they've found that it's not a pulmonary disease; it's a vascular
hmm
or systemic. They're still not
hmm
even sure about that, but it's more vascular. So it's just like every day, it's like being at your easel, even though you've practiced for years and still discovering something new or the places where you were wrong before.
right, right. So to answer the question, I don't know. I haven't thought about post COVID yet. I can't fathom the reality of when that will set in. Again, like with my job, they're talking about extending online learning. They're starting to talk about hybrid, like next semester for the lab classes like drawing or 2D design, where they need us to be there in person to show students demos. They're talking about hybrid, where we're there part of the time, and limiting the size of the classes so that we maintain the safe distance. And that's the closest thing to like integrating some idea of post-COVID, and that's in the fall semester. As far as in my work, the content, I'm I'm having a hard time going to different ideas in my art, like different subject matter. Because I love community art. I love engaging with people with my art. I love most of my art is inspired by conversation. Vast majority of my work is inspired by some topic I discuss with a friend or a colleague, and then artwork quickly follows that. And so there's so many different topics. Like I was reading an article released. I think it was like a New York Times article. It was talking about how um, the way everything has kind of gone online has started to negatively affect teenagers, like who all of a sudden had their like cycles interrupted and they don't really have the same coping mechanisms developed yet. So there's an extremely large spike in depression and suicide in teenagers right now. And
Our 16-year-old daughter is having difficulties with that, and so are so many other young people. It's just really
yeah,
bad.
and so there's so many topics that are happening right now that I, as an artist, am having a hard time choosing what to give more highlight to. Because what I love about being an artist is we have a chance to have a platform to give more volume to subjects. Whatever, it's like you're like the guys at the airport and you have those things in your hands and you're doing that. You're like, look at this topic. And so um, I've just, I'm trying my best to like find topics and ideas that I can give more highlight and reference to. I love social media. I love it so much. It's such a great way to like have they're like dormant conversations. Like you'll make a post about something, you'll reference a link to something, and then it brings a subject up, and then like depending on how many comments or likes or shares it gets, it just creates that idea about that topic, and then people are thinking about it for a while, and then it quickly moves on, it evaporates, and the next topic comes. But I'm a really big fan of like social consciousness, and what we talk about becomes reality. And when we no longer talk about it, it's gone. It's like it doesn't exist. It doesn't have as much of an effect. And we're really, I think as a society, we're very sensitive to that. So what we bring up, what we give more energy to, I think that's why Trump was such an effective hill, uh, because he knew to not shut up. He would never shut up. And I think that engine of just mentioning things and giving examples of things, it's like pointing giant arrows at those topics. And when things get attention, then there's more energy focused on those, and then solutions usually start to follow. Now, we live in a really fascinating society where media gets its money by traffic, and traffic is naturally attracted to things that like are extreme, and so they're selling ads to get the traffic, selling extreme stories, which keeps us at a slight state of hypertension. So there's like that weird animal in the mix of it, but at the same time it's interesting to try to like use social media to try to like steer parts of that momentum towards either things that are really effective and helpful, or towards subjects that otherwise aren't getting as much of an attention. I'm thinking about that stuff all the time.
Yeah, I can
And
tell.
when I'm teaching with students, like we'll go over a lot of techniques, and we'll go over design elements and examples in history. But a lot of times, like I'll bring a lot of examples of like how do you feel about things right now, and how do you think you could take your work and not necessarily illustrate it, but how could you bring some sort of a visual like replication or visual mirroring of how something's affecting you. And if you could do that, if you can get good at like trying to find a way to voice that, visually or with whatever media we're using, you're a good communicator. And so you're kind of getting more fluent in the language of art, visual art. And so that's a lot of how my brain's like constantly.
No, I'm fascinated by it. First of all, your intelligence, and the way you are a dot connector. You find the dots. You don't know what the dots are, but you see one dot and then you see another dot. It's like, oh, there's got to be a connection or not. And then of course you start doing that, and bing, 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 bing. It starts like exploding all over the place. And it's funny because you talk about social media, and yes, it is a very good. And yes, it is, like Betty White said, a huge waste of time. But it's only a huge waste of time because there's a huge difference. We were talking about cafes before. Now you have people sitting in a cafe, having coffee, maybe a little roll, that kind of thing, and they're talking and they're having pleasant conversation. You take the same individuals and move them into a bar, and it's not the alcohol, okay, but you put them in a bar. It's a different setting. And now it's going to be sports, depending on the gender, the opposite sex. It's going to be all these things that can get to be quite contentious. It's a little boisterous, there's a little bravado that's involved with it and such. Whereas with the cafes, it probably goes back to the early days in the 17th century, where in England, where the cafes started, and coffee was basically a social drug, because that's where all the new thought, the new thinking evolved from the cafes, because caffeine stimulated your brain. And social media, and prior to COVID, shut off this interaction. It was a bully pulpit, a bitch platform, whatever you want to call it. But as you're talking about interaction, yeah, that's definitely a major thing. And you have such an incredible grip on this. I think you should actually publish a blog or something, because you make it nice.
Thank you. Yeah, there's quite a few ideas I have about wanting to try to sew things together in a few different ways. And I'm in a stage in my life where I'm finally starting to think about consolidating, because for the longest time, for like the last 5 years, I was in a lot of different places at once. Like there was the textiles with installation, there was publication, and the journalism with trying to keep up with what was going on in the New Bedford and Fall River scene. There was teaching, and there was painting and animation. And so now they gave me so many different viewpoints and perspectives of how media is like personality. Like if you paint, the painting personality, or the personality of a painting and how it has an impact on the audience, is so different than how the art form of a podcast gets through to audience versus the art form of a post. It's like it releases different sensors, or there's different sensors in us that respond differently to the way that we're stimulated. That's one of the biggest things I learned with seeing like a very wide array, like lateral, like scope and sample of these different platforms. And so I've been thinking and trying to, figure out how can a consolidated process be created that informs, is inspiring, is fun, and is doable enough that it can be repeated, as often as possible. I keep coming back to video, and I've been doing a lot of digging into video art recently, and there's a lot of neat stuff out there with virtual reality. And then you go to something weird like blockchain when it comes to people investing in other people's art with virtual reality, to journalism, to just fun, making GIFs, to like just looking at all these different like animals within the video world. And of course, as a painter, I'm like, there's videography, then there's animation, and then there's the texture of like handmade media moving across the screen, which is my favorite, by far. My favorite platform is, handmade textures with some motion. And then you have the storytelling, and then the storytelling based on topics, what topics you're wanting to discuss. And then the topics, need to have a nice and wide inclusivity to them, so that it's reaching out and having a chance to relate, to as many people as possible. This is a lot of like boxes to try to tick off.
Oh yeah, and you just defined a box. I want to ask you the question about Van Gogh. Yeah. As I teased Philip Mellon, I said nobody calls it Van Gogh, it's Van Gogh. But I mean, all of those things were all like driven into the Van Gogh feature film that you worked on.
Yeah.
You talked about the textures. You talked about all, and could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So, Loving Vincent was about Van Gogh. Yeah. And it was an idea that he didn't necessarily kill himself, but I don't want to give it away for those who didn't see it, but it's an idea that he didn't actually kill himself. He has more of a heart than that. So the process of the film was basically kind of like it was a stop motion film. We used the program that was designed for stop motion animation, and we worked with oil paint. We used medium, can't remember the name of the media, but it basically created a super heavy, almost like an oatmeal toothpaste consistency out of the oil paint. And so that one, it would never dry, because we're mixing dozens of colors that we're working with. We don't want those colors to dry. And two, the paint becomes more easily able to be scraped off of the panel every time we make a frame. The frames were 20 inches by 30 inches each. So that way, whenever we had a whole figure on the frame moving across the screen, there was enough space to be able to put enough detail in that character.
And stay within a frame ratio, film frame ratio. Yeah.
Yes. So your brush strokes mattered. I learned so much about how motion is. I mean, animation is so fun. Like if you have a picture of my finger, you know, if I got this pencil right here and I take a picture and then I put the pencil here, then I put the pencil here, you know, that's a pretty fast motion. So imagine these brush strokes moving across the frame, and that's a totally different personality than if I have the brush stroke here and then 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 here. It's a very different personality. And what I love about the Van Gogh film is it's a painting in time, basically. And time is a really strong media. It's like there's 2D design, 3D design, and 4D design, time. And you know how like there's line weight variation, or like there's like color or shape or texture or silhouette, you know? Well, time is basically, it's got a series of personalities based on speed. So if I go like this, you know, that's one type of a sensation. If I go like this, that's a very different type of sensation, you know, and then you add that character on top of all the other things that are happening, like color, texture, sound, you know, you start to get this ballet, this beautiful like orchestration of an experience you create with animation that's really, really fun that you can't get with other media types. So Loving Vincent was, it was stop motion animation, oil painting, and we used a rotoscope. So we had the outlines available for each frame. They were rough. They were like very light perforated lines, and there was a lot of filling in the information for the drawing. But once you had your basic line work on the board, then you had to mass in the colors. And so you would have a reference of a Van Gogh painting that you were working from to collect the color palette for that scene. And I worked on the Dr. Gachet scene near the end. And so I had a painting of Dr. Gachet to reference to collect my colors from my color palette and mix the colors and everything. And so then it just became this emotional roller coaster of make the painting, make sure that it has the right texture, the right brush strokes, have your supervisor come look at it. They either okay it or they don't. If they don't, you scrape it and you do it again. Yeah.
Wow. I'm not even going to ask you how many times you had to do that. But.
And so if they said okay, that meant it was a good frame, and they had a whole rig system set up so that all you had to do was lean out of the camera, push a button, and you know the camera captured the frame. Right. And then you looked at the frame to make sure there wasn't a glare. If you needed to readjust the lights or anything, took a good photo of it. And then after that photo was good, then you scraped the board and then made the next frame, went through the process again.
What I find amazing is that it's the not the clashing, but the merging or the dovetailing of an ancient technique or an ancient media or an ancient tool, rotoscope. I mean, rotoscope, for God's sakes, that's like ancient. And then with this whole new thing. And you know, it is easy to get caught up in the execution of it all. But from a personal standpoint, as a painter, did you get into Vincent, or did Vincent get into you? Because I'm really, really curious when you start following someone's hand like that. You know,
it was a tug of war. You're trying to create as similar of a sensation of what you think his paintings created, and you're also trying to be consistent. As an animator, you're trying to be consistent. So like when I was showing the pencil marks, like if you make a brush stroke here on the last frame, in the next frame, your brush stroke, which is supposed to be here, accidentally looks like this. You're like, shit, that brush stroke's wrong. I got to change the direction of it. And then you're also thinking like, okay, keep the consistency right. So you start to do surgery. You're like slowly picking out that part of the brush stroke with your palette knife, and you then pick up the color again, and you're like, okay, it's here, not there. So you're doing a lot of different things, but with the brush strokes, you're always keeping in mind, make sure that it has a nice high relief to it, and trying to maintain a consistency in that texture. But honestly, in the back of my head, like I was in conversation with Van Gogh, I would be arguing and fighting with him all the time, like, why do you got to paint this way, man? Like, all right. Like I would.
Did it
'Cause
get emotional? I mean, did you feel his presence
Oh,
in the room?
I didn't feel. I felt very. I felt a lot for him when as I learned the idea, the narrative of the film, and I learned more about who he was as an artist, his relationship with Theo. I never liked Gauguin. I knew enough about Gauguin's story. I know Gauguin went through a lot and had a totally different background from Van Gogh, but I, I empathized a lot with his story, a lot more working on that film, and admired him because he had all this rejection, in his life, and he tried all these different things, and he didn't stop. He kept going, and he kept trying, and he was stubborn. I related to that part of him because I totally know what that feels like when you get a
Yeah,
bunch of no's or a bunch of
yeah,
dismissals, and you're like, I'm gonna do it anyway.
yeah.
So
Plus, he got some bad press. I mean, left his wife, he left his children, went to Tahiti, screwed around with the native girls. I mean, that's it's almost
yeah,
like, to use the new term now, the cancel culture
yeah.
of
We were talking
Gauguin.
about Gauguin. Yeah, Gauguin. Yeah. Well, I know that Van Gogh and Gauguin were like, Van Gogh tried, and then Gauguin I think of Gauguin and Van Gogh, and I think of Gauguin as a giant eye roll. I'm like, whatever, Gauguin. Um, and so I had a lot more empathy for Van Gogh working on this film,
Yeah,
and I saw a lot more of what I think was a gentle nature in him, um, and like more of a soft-spoken nature, and just focused more so on his
yeah,
work, not so much an egomaniac, but more so an obsessive maniac. And I really like empathized with that, and because which artist doesn't kind of feel nuts thinking nobody else gets it when they're like sometimes in their space and they're like trying to do something and they want to turn to somebody, do you see this, or what do you think of this, and they look at you and they scratch their head and you're like, no one gets it. So I totally saw that in
yeah,
his work and the
yeah,
story, and yeah, it was such a it wasn't a tragedy. I think it was a really good story, like his life, and just being a really sincere human who's literally just looking and finding things in front of him and trying to analyze them with color and tone. And he had our brushstrokes. I forget the art of handwriting, what that's called.
calligraphy.
It's the type where it's like your handwriting is like an extension of your personality.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's they use that for an psychiatric analysis and
Yeah,
criminal
yeah,
analysis.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not cryptology. It's close to that. Yeah,
It's a thing. And so
yeah.
you could see, I think you could see a lot of his demeanor and mannerisms in his brushstrokes, because what I had to do to make some of those brushstrokes, there was a lot of, it wasn't aggression, but it was like that paint. I had to force myself to get that paint to like really stay onto the board. Like
Hmm.
I had to almost try to
Graphology.
flatten it.
I think it's
What?
called graphology.
Typology? Yeah.
Graphology.
So
Yeah.
I think the painter brushstrokes are a similar thing. Like our mark making is a similar extension of our demeanor.
Well, did you have Bill Elliott at
I
UMass?
did not. No, I
Okay.
did not.
Well, if you had him, actually, it's too bad you didn't have him, because he would have filled so many of these questions in your head, because Bill was about texture. He was about tactility, and that is such an incredible, important thing. Just going back to Vincent, it's amazing how Theo's wife couldn't stand him at first until she met him, and then all of a sudden she was his biggest and only cheerleader. She's the
Mhm.
one that allowed Theo to keep doing what he did.
Yep.
And it was a tragic life. There's a really good, a different point of view. I believe it's called Sacre Bleu. It's Christopher Morley's book. It's about the color blue, and it brings Van Gogh into it, and it's really kind of amazing. Let's jump over to jazz, your mural, because I have a lot of questions there. Plus,
Okay.
there's a legacy in the city that you have memorialized that the surface hasn't, it's just been scratched. It goes much, much deeper. How did you get involved in that whole process, the whole project?
Yeah. So I was approached by Superflat, and I was approached because of my background in figurative art and portraiture, more specifically portraiture. And I was approached about a year, maybe a little bit less than a year before the whole project even started to happen. And the idea was tossed around like, would you be interested in doing a mural of portraits? And immediately I'm like, yes, anything with portraits. Yes, I love painting portraits. I love finding different ways to do that. And so I was excited about how do you make something of a large scale and make it readable and recognizable. So that's what was going through my head when the idea was presented to me. And then it kind of just kind of like what happened with Loving Vincent. Like I sent out an application and then there was silence for a while. We talked about the mural idea, silence for a while, almost a year went by. And then this was last year, 2020 happened, 2019 was here. And we actually started talking about it, coming into place like late 2019, early 2020, there was more conversation. And then I would say maybe like spring 2020, we started having meetings and I met Lee with the Historic Society. I was talking with Jeremiah, who we recently interviewed, which I loved that interview. And Dina and these are super flat members. And I didn't know much about the concept, just that there was going to be a large mural and there were going to be portraits. And so I kept, waiting. And then we finally started to have meetings about what the mural was about. And I was lucky because I play like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it proper jazz, but I've played jazz before. Like one of my mentors recently passed away, actually, Bill Hanna. He was like an amazing jazz mentor in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I studied briefly under him. And then
what's your instrument?
Flute. And so a big part of my social circle and here in New Bedford is in the music scene, with like Brian Cass, my husband Michael Gallant, he's also a trombone player. Brian, amazing musician. And so I've performed with some of them, at Poor Farm a couple of times during their, like, it's not like open mic, like they'll just have like this open
jam, basically
freestyle jam. Yeah, you come and it's like a traditional thing where the music begins, everyone kind of sings or plays the part, and then people take turns soloing, and then everyone does the standard again. So when I found out it was going to be a jazz mural, I just lit up even more, and so they started talking about the number of portraits, and then they started talking about the idea of memorializing these guys. And so originally they were thinking that it might be like a grid, which I'm so glad it wasn't, of people. And I was like, that's not going to be very enticing. Like there'll be like these spaces here, but it's going to look like a yearbook. And so they gave me permission, which I'm very thankful for, to really like take the references and to like, let me just play to create a design. And so I was thinking about those, nights when we perform. And I was like, these guys are legends. So why not put them together as if they're performing? And one of my favorite things when I'm listening to live music is when a solo is getting ready to begin, like everything's winding up and then it's getting ready to be their turn to like, serenade everybody. So I was like, that's the moment I'm going to try to create with all of them. And so, it just became looking at as many of the references that they gave me and trying to create like or choreograph this moment that shows that, simultaneous buildup of all of the musicians except for one of them, where he's getting ready to take over as a solo. And that design was, approved. It went through a ton of variations. There was a lot of like subtle movements between the positioning and color palettes. And when we finally reached a design and made a couple more modifications to it, and they gave the okay, the stamp for okay, the building owner and Neil and the Historic Society, they were like, okay, yes, this is it. And then it came time to install, which in hindsight, without Superflat, Superflat's amazing. I just want to give a shout out to that organization. They are incredible. Like they're so organized. They're so on fire. They're so driven. They are an amazing asset to New Bedford and bringing more public art, to the community here, because they made this whole process in hindsight seem like easier than closing a Ziploc bag. Like you just go boop, boop. Like they made the whole process so easy. when it finally came time to install, Brian Tilley and I, we were installing the drawing of the design on the wall. That took like a day and a half, maybe. And then there was a handful of helpers we were able to hire, some more artists from the city to help. And I turned the design into kind of like a coloring book, like a color by number, because I didn't know who was going to work on the mural or the level of their artistry skills. Just they needed to be able to pick up a brush or pick up a can of spray paint and fill in the shapes.
Yeah.
So I made the design so that it was very easy to fill in. And so there was a whole group of artists working on it at the bottom. And then Brian and I, or Mandy Frazier and I, or Mike, my husband and I, we were at the top on the boom lift, like slowly working our way down. I focused mostly on the portraits, of course. And what I found was that, it's just like basic drawing 101. If you have your highlights and your light, your core shadow line change, and then your shadow with a reflected light. If you have all those properties in place, plus, basic understanding of the anatomical features, as long as you have those shapes, you're good. It's going to model. It's going to turn in space. And so seeing that play out on a really large scale, I was like super excited about that. I had a fun time playing with like some illusion of space by switching the colors around so that at one moment a color was an object, and then another moment that same color was actually a shadow, so like the painter and me kind of had a lot of fun geeking out, in some of those color and design aspects. But it was so much fun. We installed the mural in less than 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an undertaking as well.
Yeah, we were racing against the storm. There was a big tropical storm coming in.
That's right.
We have it done by then.
Yeah, and of the giants that you painted, the one person that came into my consciousness as of this past year was Paul Gonsalves, and his saving the Duke Ellington Orchestra from ruin. I don't know why they were headed that way, but his 35 chorus solo at the 1965 Newport Jazz Festival is still a legend, the stuff of legend. And again, when I said just scratch the surface, I think also your mural helped to bring the fact that it wasn't a bunch of disparate musicians, Bobby Green, Coleus, and Armstead Christian. It's a whole bunch of musicians. In fact, there's probably even more that we're not even really well aware of that passed. They put in their time and they passed. And someone was telling me in a very excited, animated fashion, they're a jazz aficionado, and they said, "Do you realize that it's the Cape Verdean musician residents of New Bedford that have formed what modern jazz is? It's because of them." And like, wow, I don't know, but just based on your enthusiasm, I'll accept it. And we do. We have, it's for so many years, this city, in Lucium Defundum, it's all about light. And for so many reasons, for so many years, and for whatever reason, we kept that light under a bushel. And I think, I went away for about a year to Portugal and came back, and I was just shocked at the changes that happened in that short period of time. And it's still going on. And the pandemic hasn't done anything to stifle it, to shortchange it, to stop it. It's still rolling along at an incredible pace. And speaking of which, what are your takeaways in general from the pandemic to date? In other words, I've had a lot of people tell me about their experiences, that things that they overlooked or things that they took for granted or whatever, that now it's a whole different ballgame, and they're hoping they could be the same better person afterwards, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Big takeaways from the pandemic. I feel like we kind of reinvented a whole new channel of interaction by technology. I hope that our ability to congregate in person isn't affected too much. You know how like there's generational shifts, and what was hot for one kind of quickly becomes outdated for another. I hope that like our social patterns don't shift permanently accidentally between generations of like younger people not wanting to engage in physical spaces as much. I'm hoping it's probably not going to happen because I mean, like people love spending time together, like engaging with one another. But things like going to concerts, hanging out, going to parties and openings and stuff. Another takeaway from the pandemic is we're a lot more mindful of how precious and short-lived this experience is, I think. And so we probably have a lot more of an appreciation of things that matter. I've noticed a ton of services and products that are starting to pop up that seem to be more closer to the heart as opposed to more superficial consumption things, buying for the sake of buying. So there seems to be a lot more of a reach out and a concern for connecting with one another. Then I think the pandemic helped bring that on. Another thing is, travel's been limited for so many. So I'm wondering how is that going to change? Like once everything gets lifted, a lot of our industries have been negatively affected, and people not having access to jobs, and like just this whole system of like this whole section of the economy has been stifled tremendously. So I'm wondering how people are going to recover from that, and I'm wondering, I'm just wondering what's going to happen with that. Like we still have our restaurants here that are open. They're still they're limited, but I just, I'm sure we're going to be able to bounce back. But there's so many businesses that have shut down that I feel for. I'm wondering, how is this going to affect business models in the future? Are there going to be a lot of switches to online consumer purchase patterns as opposed to in-person patterns? And how's that going to affect things like the way that we make marketing materials, and who's the maker of those things? Artists, who's the, how is this going to affect the objects and the items that we start to kind of value more or use more often as a service? I hope this is something I remember finding, and it just pissed me off. If you look at the industries, if you Google industries, list of industries, art and design aren't listed. They're not
considered an industry.
So I hope that it's like I would love for there to be a movement just to put those two words on that list, because it just baffles me how people don't understand that their experience is affected by the making of things, like anything visual, anything audio, anything that's a user good, like industrial design, that is design. So I'm hoping that there's more of an awareness of how much our sanity is kept by the arts and by design. Something I love about this state actually is that it seems to have a better support system for the arts. I say that because a lot of my friends in North Carolina, particularly Asheville, are struggling. There's actually a big gentrification that's happening in Asheville, North Carolina over the last few years. Artists are starting to move out because they can't afford. And there's not a support system in place down there the way there is here in Massachusetts with things like the arts, the Mass Cultural Council, for example. So I am very appreciative of the systems that we have here, and I hope that they get better and stronger. And I think that starts with people recognizing the value that artists brings to their everyday life, because that's going to help take away from this like dry, empty commodification of really basic, cheap goods, made in China goods. It's going to bring back ideas of anything that we use that we need, we probably would be able to find it at some sort of you could be a mom and pop store, or even without the brick and mortar stores. Like there's so many artisans that make so many amazing things. What if they figured out ways to streamline or industrialize a little bit more so that they could then become more made in USA type products? That I'm hoping that starts up again.
For that to happen, we have to go back to the concept of neighborhoods, which were destroyed in this city in comparison to Fall River. If you know anyone from Fall River and you say, where are you from? They'll say Maplewood, or they'll say up to Flint, or they'll say, the Seven Hills. Whereas here in New Bedford, if you say, where are you from? And they'll say, oh, the West End. That's not a neighborhood. That's a geographic location or designation. What's happened is with the great white flight to the suburbs because of the malls and the automobile, those neighborhoods were decimated. The properties became portfolio fodder for financiers, and And then they say, well, look, it's a low rent district. Well, who made it that way? It wasn't that way before when I was a kid, growing up in that neighborhood. But in that neighborhood, you had all the services and amenities that you could want. You had the restaurants and the hardware stores, and instead of this mega everything. And pretty much, if they didn't have it, then you'd go out of your neighborhood to downtown, for the other stuff. And I'm hoping that there was a trend among the millennials prior to the pandemic. There was several different names for this movement. The safest one to use is it's re-villagization, because the pandemics were loaded down with college debt, student loans. They knew that they'd never ever be able to buy a home. They knew that they'd never be able to buy a new car if they could afford a car at all. So they rediscovered the downtown areas and the lofts and the mills and all that other stuff, and they started creating this other sub economy. And then unfortunately that goes all awry. This is a great conversation, Kat. This really is. I mean, this is. I tell everybody, this is not a one and done. Everybody's invited to come back whenever they want to talk about something or whatever. And let me tell you that the door for you is revolving. You don't even have to, see if it's locked. Just keep, just push through, and get through, because you're stimulating a lot of things here, and I'm trying to stay on track as best as I can.
That welcome to my studio life. Like it's got this sense of like, and it's not insanity, it's just frustration, because there's a lot of things that are always going on in the studio, and they're always untethered. And so what I try to do is I'll lean in which direction the wind is blowing, and the wind is who needs what, when, is there a deadline, and what do we got? And that's kind of in this bit of a filter system that I've created, because there's always something. Like,
yeah, I could never be bored. I'm sure you can't.
No. Like, I'll give an example. Like, and a lot of the stuff is spontaneous and it's inspired by conversations. So, like, an example, I'm teaching in an electronic imaging class, and it's got some animated components to it with Adobe After Effects, and it also is involving fine arts. So they're making illustrations. I give them examples. Like this. This is like market illustrations. They're animating with them, and they're learning the platforms, and they're doing so well. I'm reaching out to other artists who are either getting ready to go viral or have gone viral to see if they'd be willing to work with the students to create something for them, so the students get a chance to work professionally. And then who knows what artists are available, but then it kind of creates this random like, okay, this is happening now, we got to do this now. And then other times it's just like a ghost town and I don't hear from anything. And that's just with teaching. And then there's things like community art, like what happened with the jazz mural. That was like a serendipitous out of the blue. It's like being in the right place at the right time. And having your stuff ready to go. So like always drawing, so your drawing's good, always having material moving through your hands, so your like tactility is on point and sensitive, in conversations with one another, so you're on point with what's going on. And just like then living, and then just kind of responding. And it makes it a lot easier to create stuff, because if you're just responding, you're not really trying. You're not like moving from someplace internal, you're like, it's like an extroverted external response. You're part of that conversation.
Well, there's kind of a renaissance going on as well, and basically what you were talking about, these we call it collaboration, but I've heard several artists referring to hoping that we could bring back the guild system or the workshops.
Yes.
Where you learn. I mean, don't forget the MFA program was supposed to be exactly that, but because you got stuck in academe and you had to have, okay, I have to take biology. Why do I need biology? And it's not the same old, the painter, the BFA students say, what do I need biology for? What I need in the science is, how about anatomy? Now, anatomy would really be something I could use, because we have all this fluff in education and academe, especially for the artists. But yeah, the guild system, and that's another thing for the kids, especially. When I say kids, well, I'm 68, so that's a pretty down slope from there. But none of us ever learned anything or got anywhere without somebody else either guiding us, pushing us, and that's what we need. I think what you're speaking about is this undercurrent, and I have friends in Detroit. It's called the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club. It started off as an antiques dealer and his friend having coffee, and then somebody joined them. And it was like, if you've ever seen birds, you know, one bird lands and another bird lands, and they're pecking at something, and another bird lands and another bird lands. Well, this is like 600 people that jammed to this restaurant. Started off in 2009. And since then, since 2009, they have sold $4 million of artwork.
Wow.
Because at every one of these breakfast club meetings, and there's an agenda, and that's about as tight as they get, because they said they don't want buildings, they don't want boards of directors, they don't want anything. You show up, you know, you sign in the register, you have a piece of work, you've got 2 minutes, you have two pieces of work and 2 minutes to describe them, and you have to be ready to sell that work on the spot.
Right. Oh, that's great.
So there's collectors, and there's buyers, and there's art students, and there's curious people, and everybody shows up, and it's this incredible social, what would you call it?
You're describing something. It's a phenomena that I recently. You're describing an example of a phenomena that I recently put my finger on. It's going to sound silly. It's plugs and outlets, and it's systems. So I love systems so much because whenever there's a system, you create an avenue which creates flow. Mm-hmm. And so when you have like a system that connects, like a plug and an outlet, it opens up a doorway, and then a lot of people can go through that doorway. And that system's basically made with structure. So like when this happens, this happens. So people ask questions. So what do we do? This and this. Okay, let's go. You know, a lot of times people are stifled when they don't have instructions to follow, which I think is fascinating. It's like we love independence, but we also love being told what to do so we don't have to think about it. So when you create a structure of like, this is what's up. We meet here, you have 15 minutes. You're gonna have a chance to sell here, and you gotta do this, and then go. And people are like, all right. And then it creates this whole avenue, which is really powerful.
Yeah.
Structure. Structure is great. Like if there's rules are there to help, I think they're not there to enforce or punish. They're there to create a system and structure.
Rules are expectations. I mean, that's what I've always taught my daughter and my grandchildren.
That's really good. That's a good thought. Points of structure. So actions that are supposed to happen when a certain set of circumstances are occurring, I guess. Yeah. So like I was talking with a painter about setting up a guild possibly in New Bedford, because both of us were experiencing a similar client who approached us who said, we want you to make this, and we want it to be ready here, go. And we're like, okay, here's basic price per inch, blah, blah, blah. And they were like undercutting by 80%. We're like, no. And so they approached another artist, and basically we were talking about guild system for the sake of like, if every artist knew the value of their time and overhead and then gave a price based on that, that's structure. That's like, okay, painting, blah, 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 you give structure, and then it opens up more doorways because people have that basic system and they're in communication with one another. They know what's up, you know, and they're not left isolated. So what you're talking about with that group, you know, they have a system. They're like, okay, we're meeting here. We're doing this. This is what you do. And then this is what you do. And then this is going to happen. And if you don't do that, it's just not that you're kicked out. You're just not going to be able to be a part of it because you're not doing the things. And that repetition of actions, creating that cycle, that system, you know, creates a catalyst.
And the beauty of it is, even if you're a passive observer, you cannot help but absorb what's going on. Yeah. Because, you know, if you're like, you know, okay, you're in high school and, you know, you've got that drive and, you know, your parents are like, is this going to be a good thing? And la, 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 la. So you go to this breakfast club and you hear the older people and you start to see what's happening and they're shaping you. And I don't want to get into a commercial on that, but I would love like a couple of minutes after we wind this down to discuss it with you, because for you to see for yourself, because that's really what we need. That is now the big missing link in our creative community. For the longest time, we thought it was just galleries, because we thought, well, what's a gallery for? It's to show and to sell. But basically, it's about selling. You know, the showing can be like, here, check this out, and, you know, take it from there. The other mural. So we've got about 10 minutes. The other mural, what is that one all about?
So this one is with the CEDC, the Community Economic Development Center, and they are making headway trying to improve parts of the north end of the city, beautifying it, and they approached me to create a small mural for it. Originally, I was going to paint on a building in the north end, but then there was a bit of a fallout with the building owner. He said something, I don't remember, and then it turned into more of a panel installation project. And so I had to build panels. They're 4 by 8 feet each. There's 3 of them. And they were open with me to make it about anything I wanted. And so I decided, let's make it about a reflection of who's here so we don't randomly interject something that has nothing to do with what's around here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made it about like Guatemala, Portuguese, and African American. And I was like, they're very different backgrounds. What do we tie them with? I was like, dance. Dance is happy. Who doesn't love dancing? So I researched a little bit of the history of hip hop, of the Guatemalan dance and Portuguese dance. And I found a lot of really amazing narratives that I used to kind of infuse into the visual designs of the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
All of them, they're 4 by 8 feet. And so they all have the same color palette that I worked with, and they all contain like a male and a female dancing. And then there's tons of symbolism like integrated into them that shows bits of history of each one of them. And I learned a lot working on this project. But again, it's a project that's going to be installed in the north end. It's going to start out at a theater in the north end. I can't remember the name of the theater.
The Capitol?
Maybe.
Is the Capitol on, it's Dean and Cushing Avenue?
There's these black bars at the entrances, like these old iron gates,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful iron gates there. So we're installing there this week on Friday. And
I think there's an electronics store there now, but it used to be a full-blown theater.
Yeah, I believe that's the location.
I spent many hours there as a child watching movies. Yeah.
It'd be great if it opened up. It'd be awesome. But I don't want to take us off track. There's so many places that would be great to open up again. Orpheum, you want to go to the Orpheum Theater? I won't open that Pandora box, but like.
Oh no! Again, but the point is, based on this entire conversation, and I think you and I are kind of similar in a way that we have to think out loud. Just being quiet about it. You have to engage with somebody in conversation, not to show them how smart you are, but because it's a process that you're going through in your own head, and then you start listening to them, and you start adjusting what you have, and it's symbiotic. It's a good thing, and there's so many things that we definitely need here. What I liked about your description of the mural is that instead of showing people something they already know, is you're showing something to them that they don't already know. Because people say, Guatemalans? I mean, I lived on Earl Street between the Avenue and North Front Street when I went to the Immaculate Conception school. Back then, there were enclaves. The Portuguese were from the Avenue down to North Front, and from North Front down to Belleville Avenue. The Polish were up on the boulevard, but they were north of Hathaway, or probably Eugenia and Tinkham Street. I don't know where the line of divide was. And then the French Canadians were south of that line. So it was kind of bizarre. Well, you just look at the churches. The churches were the middle of the community. And that's what pretty much, differentiated everything. And what's so great about it is that, again, you could walk everywhere. You could buy local. You knew your neighbors. It was a totally different world. And I hopefully we're going to start to see that coming back. Let's see. One more thing. Takeaways, Jazz.
Yeah, I love, I'm so excited about to see the install of this. And there was a whole system that I created from this project by accident, and that was making movable murals. They're no longer a mural if they're movable, because mural means going onto a wall. I don't know the word for movable mural, but I created a whole system so that if you basically can create these movable large installs and put them anywhere you want.
What's great about that is that collect the entire set. You get one set going in for so many months, another set going in, like billboards, and they're never destroyed. They're kept in an inventory that grows, it expands, and then part of that inventory has to be repaired. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because that's really outdoor art. I mean, I used to ask my marketing students, because I was the only MFA to teach in the college business, but I used to ask my marketing students, Okay, what happens when they bring graffiti off the street? What happens when they legitimize something? You know, it's like bringing a bird. You know, it's the caged bird theory. If you put the bird in a cage because you love to hear it sing and you like to look at it,
Okay.
how is it going? Will it survive? Will it get sad and die? But it obviously worked.
Yeah, the graffiti thing's fascinating. Like if you're bringing a representation of that indoors for observation, and it creates the whole idea of the gaze again
Mm-hmm.
on something else, and then you start looking at an idea replication of it as opposed to the actual thing because you're not outside on the side of the wall looking at it. Like then I think it then becomes a lost in translation thing, which language evolves really quickly. And so if you see a representation of something, you have to remember to bring all the context with it, which is impossible. It's like carrying water from here to there. You're going to lose some along the way.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And
And then
so
historically too, you get people who find what becomes an artifact, and they're like, "Wow, this is really intriguing. This is really fascinating." But beyond being intrigued and being fascinated, I have no idea what the heck I'm looking at or what this purpose was.
yeah,
You know?
and it's nice. It's a treat listening to what people discover and find because you get a sense of utility and then what they valued and who
Yeah.
they were, what resources they had access to, like their level of creativity and ingenuity to make something out of what was around them, and then their level of humor. I think a lot of our inventions kind of reflect our level of what we think matters and what we don't think matters. It's like, that doesn't matter over there.
Well,
We're not gonna do much.
that happens with our parents and our grandparents. You ask them about stuff that you're interested in. It's like, what do you want to know that for? You know,
Yeah.
because it's intriguing to me. Well, it was nothing. You did da boom, and that's their attitude. It's only when you have that oral history. It's only when you have those stories that are handed down from generation to generation that things survive. I'm going to put you on a spot as we take this out, as they say. In your humble opinion, but knowledgeable humble opinion, what do you think the South Coast creative community needs the most of right now? And I don't have an idea or an answer. So this is not a loaded question.
Wow. Let's see. I feel very blessed to be connected to people who I see doing amazing things. So I know amazing things are happening. I also know there's a lot of parts that need more attention. Like I see, I every once in a while I'll click on like the New Bedford Guide page just to see like what happened, and you see the same stories over and over. And if it keeps happening, it's got to be a reflection of what's still happening here. So I think access to information and information about being able to achieve what you're wanting to go after. So if there's, some neighborhoods that have young ones that have a lot of time on their hands but don't know what they're capable of, that's a problem. They're going to go into other activities where they're going to spend their time around people and their talents and interests are going to be wasted, and they're going to end up on places like New Bedford Guide. I think we need to have more distribution of information that makes it so that people can easily access what they're capable of and integrate that into their own community. People naturally shine when they do amazing things. Like I did that, and that becomes contagious, easily contagious. And it can quickly die out if it's squished, if it's muted. So just again, I know so many people who are doing really great things, and we can only extend ourselves to a certain point. If we teach systems, if we use the systems we already have and make them more accessible information-wise, like for example, if someone wants to start a business and the paperwork they have to fill out, if it's like a basic DBA, you go to City Hall and you pay like a $50 fine, you go to the bank to set up a banking account and you start marketing your content, making information of how to do things like that easily accessible so that people don't feel like they have to be special to do that, or making access to information, from resources from schools to activities available out after school for students. There's all these little niche solutions, and there's all these amazing people who are applying themselves to these niche solutions. If it's recognized, I think, again, media is powerful. if there's more spotlight on individuals and organizations that are a part of the solution, to a point, if they use the same marketing psychology to that, so people are like, I want to do that, as opposed to that.
Yeah. We need aggregation.
Yeah.
And I know Margot Saulnier is working her butt off. I mean,
She's
it's a
amazing.
part-time job, and
Yes.
she's doing like
She
more than a full-time
Yeah.
job. And
Wow.
but at aggregation, we need to have that. The old term was a spatter box, but we need where everything goes into this one spot, so that it can be disseminated out, because there are just so many facets to it. I mean, I've been saying for the longest time, we need a high school of a FAME high school, a visual and performing arts high school. We have vocational education. What is wrong with visual performing and literary arts? But I think you actually just answered that question for me before, when you said art is not seen as an industry, yet tourism and recreation is. It's kind of bizarre,
Oh, so the viral media content, songs, like jingles.
Yes,
like
yes,
those pretty
yeah,
effective. Like,
yeah.
Give somebody a budget to write those and make sure they're effective. Like, be choosy and make sure you find someone who's good at writing those. And then that person needs to research or work with people who are researching the content that's going to go into those jingles. Set those off, be like, this is what we're talking about now. Like the whole thing that happened with, what was the name of that grapefruit juice company? Ocean Spray. Like that guy basically created a vibe because he was just like, he had the visuals, the audio, the natural.
And he had a multi-generational thing. Are you talking about the two gentlemen in the bog, the older man and the younger one that seemed to be disconnected from everything?
Oh, there was a guy, he was like riding his skateboard because his car was not working. He was on his way to pick up his car maybe, and he was drinking a bottle of Ocean Spray, and then he was listening to Fleetwood Mac along the way, and he videoed himself on the skateboard as he was taking a swig of the Ocean Spray, and then just like in the moment, like sun was shining and everything, he was just chilling, and it became viral, and like people started to like mimic it. Fleetwood Mac became popular again. Ocean Spray bought him a new car because it was free marketing on their part. So that's a nice cheap budget. Give him a new car. And so like marketing is really powerful, but we use it to sell, and we're selling ideas, but for some reason ideas are more geared towards what's bottom line profit oriented. Like if we use that same animal, but be like long-term bottom line profit is like the betterment of community, then identifying those and then aligning things like marketing items to that, and then wait, like it's a bit of a slow game at first, but then it starts to turn over. I've witnessed that, I've seen that. Like you create content, you communicate, you think, you communicate with others, making your work, and then you just keep doing it, and it becomes like a sensation to the degree of how hard you push that idea. And then there's the whole where two or more gathered, I am there. I think that's about the insane amount of energy that comes when people are on the same page and move in the same direction with their own skill sets.
That's what they call communion, because communion is with union. So a lot of these concepts are as old as time. We have to wind this down, and I'll need a few minutes, but the open invitation to come back. So this has been fascinating with Kat Knutsen, and wow, my head's spinning so fast it's hard for me to try to slow down to close this up. No, this is wonderful. In fact, it's already got me into another level of something else. But it's Ron Fortier one more time. Thank you so much for joining us again for the In Focus podcast, brought to you by Heavenly Spirits, who's our sponsor. And if you'd like to sponsor us as well, please drop us a line so we can do more, because it is about more in this particular case, and getting the word out and getting everybody documented for the future. So once again, thanks so much. Be safe out there, be careful out there, be smart out there, and be kind to each other. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.